Dr. Tom Messer. Dr. Messer is pastor of Trinity Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Florida, a church that Dr. Bob Gray pastored for many, many years. They average about 3,000 every Sunday morning. They have a Christian school of over 1,400. And then he's the president of Trinity Baptist College in Jacksonville. I've had the privilege of knowing Dr. Messer for quite a while. I knew him when he was working in the school as a basketball coach and helping out with the university, and then became a staff member at the church and now is the pastor. The thing I remember about Tom is through all of that, he's not changed. He's the same person now as he was when he was working as a basketball coach, and I appreciate that so much. One of the fine churches in America, and I appreciate Dr. Messer so much, and it's a joy for me to have him as our speaker tonight. Dr. Messer, come and speak to us. God bless.
Well, I can tell that you have a fun senior class, and I can tell that there's an enormous amount of potential. I've never seen so many people win so many awards in such a short period of time, and I will leave here impressed. This is a great occasion and opportunity for me. My daughter, I have 4 children, 3 boys. Our boys are 20, 15, and 2, and that was not intended to be funny. That's reality, okay? And that is another story for another day and another sermon. But our daughter is 17 years old. She turns 18 next month, and I presided over her graduation last Thursday night. And so I'm going to say to you, I asked her, I said, honey, I'll get anybody in the world to speak at your high school graduation. You tell me who it is that you want me to have speak at it, and I'll get them. I thought she'd say, well, Dad, you know, why don't you speak at it? And she didn't. In fact, I gave her 3 opportunities, and she turned me down every time. So I am going to say to you tonight what I would have said to my daughter if she had given me a chance to do it at her graduation. And so I come not really trying to impress you as a speaker, but hopefully say to you what I think your mom and dad would like to say to you if they could have just one last opportunity. Everything in your life will change after tonight. Maybe not drastically or suddenly, but you are leaving behind the world of being a child, and somehow tomorrow you'll be more of an adult than you were a child. It doesn't mean that you won't enjoy moments of immaturity and lightheartedness, but it also means that responsibilities begin to change. My daughter called me this morning at 7:30. She was on her way to work, and she said this was her first day at another job. She's been working a job, but she was working a different job this morning, and she said, Daddy, I got lost. And I said, well, why don't you just call work and ask them how to get there? She goes, you want them to think that I'm dumb on the first day? I said, well, why did you call me? She said, because I know you won't think I'm dumb. So things do change. Responsibilities are different once you graduate. And you begin to make choices in life, whether we as your parents want you to make them or not. You begin to make choices that are independent of sometimes our ability to influence you. So I want to speak tonight on a very simple thought. In fact, I want to try to ask and answer this question that is asked in the book of James. What is your life? What is your life? James is writing to a people that are scattered abroad, a people that are trying to make sense out of what sometimes seems like a senseless world. Does that sound familiar to you? The more you read the newspaper and watch the news and take the temperature of current events, you begin to think there's a lot of things going on in our world that do not make sense. James said, "Go to now, ye that say, today or tomorrow we will go into such a city and continue there for a year, and buy and sell and get gain. Whereas ye know not what shall be on the morrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time, and then vanisheth away. For that ye ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live, and do this, it is sin." Our tendency is to always like to look back. We, particularly us that have gotten a little bit older, like to remember the good old days. You know what makes the good old days so good is our memories have gone. And we have really forgotten the reality of what they were like. We face a time like this, and it was so, I don't even know you, and I enjoyed reliving your senior year with you. And there are memories that you capture, and you think back on people that have touched your life, or events that you've experienced, or accomplishments that you've attained, and you want to capture those things and remember them. But the truth of the matter is, you cannot live in the past. As much as you and I would like to be able to do that, it is an impossibility. So James does that which I think is so pointed and so necessary for us. He really doesn't ask us, well, what was your life like? He asks, what is your life? What is it right now that makes up your life? In our, what people call brave new modern world, people have tried to come together for what seems to be noble purposes, the pursuit of peace and prosperity for all mankind. And in this pleasure-seeking, pleasure-dominated world, we find that it is increasingly filled with people who live their lives without any reference to God at all. Well, that's the challenge about even Christian education. It really doesn't matter if we've taught you skill sets, educational curriculums, but it does matter if we've taught you to walk with God and consider Him. See, it is a sad thing when God ceases to be a part of our daily lives, where there becomes a calculated indifference, if you will, a skepticism about the existence of God. In fact, even in Christian culture, people have lived without an awareness of God's impact on our day-by-day life. People in churches like this church, and people in our church, or young people in schools like this school and like our schools, they're so arrogantly independent of God that they attend church, they choose spouses or mates for life, decide on vocations, have children, buy and sell homes, expand their portfolios, and ride the currents of culture. And they do all of those things without really thinking at all, where does God fit into this? What does God have to do with my life? In fact, when you think about it, we live, and then we say, well, I wonder where God fits in. An old early church father made this statement: we're to love God and do as you please. That has become in our day, do as you please, and then say you love God. There's a big difference. It's not what you say one day out of the week, or it's not what you say when your life gets into a crisis. It is really setting aside a casual arrogance about life, a selfish independence, and it's considering the sacredness of a life that God has entrusted to us. When James is writing to these people, I think he had in mind people that had a world of opportunity in front of them. And he's challenged them to live a life in view of how sacred it is for God to give us these opportunities. And tonight, for a few moments, let me challenge you about living what I would call an examined life, a life that includes God. Now, if you're going to do that, there's several things that have to happen. First of all, you need to deal with what I call presumptions about life. And presumption is just assuming that you can control and manage your life just fine without considering God. That is, you can do whatever you want to do, and you can do it without really being concerned as to what God thinks about your life. The other day, in fact, on the day that my daughter graduated from high school, it was a very hectic day. We did not plan for it to be this way, and that's the way most things are in our lives. We don't plan it, and exactly what we don't plan happens. My wife and I were to move into a new house in April. And as the way things go in our life, we didn't make it in April. We promised our daughter, we'll have your graduation party in our new house. And so we moved into this new house 24 hours before she graduated. That is not a very wise thing to do. And then she is a typical 17-year-old. I can just imagine what many of you have gone through. She bought a graduation dress on Tuesday. She took it back on Wednesday and got another one. And then Thursday at 1 o'clock, in the midst of absolute chaos in our house, she said, "Dad, it's just not going to work." I'm thinking, should we graduate in 6 hours? So I did what I advise any parent to do. I gave my 20-year-old son a credit card. And I said, take her to the store. I said, don't even tell me until tomorrow what this is costing me. I said, I said, bring me a receipt. They went off. I got ready, and I was at church, and we had about 2,500 people at graduation. I got there, I got dressed in my regalia like I was supposed to be. I was standing in the place I was supposed to stand. I thought, you know what? I'm going to go back and make sure my daughter's here. And I did, and she was there. And I said to her, honey, I said, you look really nice. And she goes, this is the dress you bought me. I said, it looks really nice. She says, you want me to tell you how much it costs? I said, don't tell me. I said, I'm going to go on the assumption that you look nice. I got up on the platform, and I looked over, and I looked at my 20-year-old son. I thought, now he looks really sharp. He's been away at college. I'm thinking, man, they must have taught him how to dress well at college. And I was seeing him. In fact, I leaned over to the guy that was doing the graduation. I said, there's my son. He goes, he looks sharp. I said, I know he does. You know what he did? He presumed that he could manage his life and my credit card without consulting me. And we had to have a meeting of the mind about that. And you know, the truth is, some of you are going to do that with God. See, you've been given and young people, you'll be given more opportunity, more liberty, more license, more privilege, more rights than you've ever had. And it is as if God is really handing you a credit card on life and saying, go at it. But you can't presume that you can make choices apart from God. Here's the 4 things that this person does that really are always the struggle for us. He presumes, like we presume, on the duration of his life. This is what he says. Go to now. Today or tomorrow. That is, he's just making an assumption that life just goes on. We'll get to this later. There's adequate time for us to think about our future. My grandmother lived to be 99 years of age. And you know, I remember her talking about dying when she was 60. And she lived 39 more years after that. And you know, I notice one thing: as people get older, they stop presuming that life goes on forever. And young people, when you leave here tonight, would you for a moment allow the soberness of this thought to sink in? You're not going to live on this earth forever. Do not presume about the duration of your life. Do not presume, secondly, about the location of your life. Here's what he says: I'm going to go to such a city. That expression means this: I'm going to pick a place to go live. So, like, you know, world geography just pulls out a map and says, boy, that's a place where you can go and make a lot of money. Or this is a place with a great tropical climate. Or here's a nice place where I could meet a lot of fun people. And so he says, I'm just going to go to this city. And really, here's what he's saying: I'm going to go live it up in this city. Now, you say, well, is it wrong to just want to live somewhere? No. It's just wrong to dictate to God where you're going to live. You see, some of you may mistakenly think that God wants you to stay in this city. But God may want you to go to a city halfway around the world and take the gospel of Jesus Christ there. You cannot presume that you're going to make the choice only about your life, about the duration or the location of your life, or really, you can't even presume on the vocation of your life. This man, go to now, ye that say today or tomorrow we would go to such a city and continue there for a year and buy and sell. Now he's figured it out. I'm going to arrange my life for my benefit and pleasure. His interest was exclusively in making money by buying and selling. And you know what? He never considered that maybe that wasn't God's will for his life. Just this week I was speaking, the mayor and I of our city had a meeting together. I would consider him to be a friend. We're not close acquaintances, but we talk on a fairly regular basis. He said to me, the biggest pressure in my life right now, he's trying to build a federal courthouse in the city of Jacksonville. He said, what was a $190 million building has been escalated in price to $300 million. He did not look like a happy man. He did not look like a man that got up every day and was thinking about the joy of trying to pull off that building project. And we're trying to build a $1.2 million women's and children's shelter to get homeless women and homeless children off the streets. I said to him, I said, John, I said, I'd rather spend my life trying to raise $1,200,000 to get poor people off the streets than to build a $300 million courthouse that may impact nobody for eternity. You know what he said? He said, I'd rather be doing what you're doing than doing what I'm doing. You know what we do? We presume. We presume that we can just call the shots about the vocations of our life. He presumed, finally, on the motivation of his life. Here's what it is. He says, I'm going to get gain. You know what the motto of this world is? More. Just a little bit more. Just a little more money, a little more pleasure, a little more possessions, a little more popularity, a little more. And we've created a culture that has an insatiable appetite for self-pleasure. And do you know that it may not be the will of God for us to have more? Have you considered that? See, young people, take it not from what I say, but on the authority of the Word of God. Don't presume about life. You got to deal with presumptions about life. But number two, if you're going to live and examine life, then you need to clarify your perspective on life. Now, James cautions us that a man that presumes is going to have a distorted and clouded perspective about life. This is how he describes it. Whereas you know not what shall be on the morrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away. Think about this for a moment. You don't know what is going to happen tomorrow, because your life is nothing more than a misty cloud that appears. And it appears for a little while. At a funeral, I'm a 17-year-old senior in high school. One of the toughest funerals that I've ever had to do. Scott was not born physically whole. Nobody really knew what his life expectancy was. The speculation that he probably into early adulthood. He seemed to be physically fine at the moment that he died. He told his mom one night, about 9 o'clock at night, he said, "Mom, I have a headache." She feel better in the morning. She said, I'll take you to the doctor. She went back and checked on him about 5:30 in the morning. And he had slipped out into eternity, into the presence of God. He had come to see me about 6 months before he died. He said to me in my office, he said, "Pastor," he said, I want to talk to you about something in my life. And it was a very serious subject. And we talked about it at length. It was a problem, and it was a problem that he really had to face and handle in his life. And I told him what I thought he should do about it and how I thought he should handle it. When we got all done talking about that, this is what he said to me. He said, I want you to know that I really want to die. I didn't take that as being suicidal. I didn't think he was despondent, depressed, discouraged. But for him, facing everything that he was facing in life, he just felt like perhaps he'd be better off dead than alive. It's kind of a hard thing. And I prayed with him and talked with him and tried to encourage him. And I remember thinking after he ended up dying, and by the way, there was some 1,000 to 1,100 people at his funeral service. He had gotten to the point in school where he could not go any further in our school. And he went to a large public school just 2 miles from us. And he spent the majority of what was his senior year in high school being a testimony for God in that public school. Took his Bible, witnessed to kids, invited them to church. I mean, we have a big athletic program in our high school, and it's one of the best in the city, public or private schools. He was a big fan of our school, but he became a big fan of their school as well. I mean, his loyalties were, he poured his heart into it. He touched so many people's lives that 1,100 people showed up at his funeral service. And person after person has written notes and shared testimonies about how he impacted his life. And you know, you'd have to say this about little Scott's life when you look back at it. I'm reminded of what Corrie ten Boom said. It's not the duration of your life that is important, but the donation of your life. It's not how long you live that matters, but it's what you do with how much life you have that really counts. When you meet a 17-year-old that says, you know, I think I've lived as long as I want to live and I want to die, and you discover that his life has touched that many people, you'd have to say this: he didn't waste a single day of it. He made the most of it. And young people, when you leave here, don't presume life's going to go on forever. Get a perspective. It's a vapor. It's just a brief period of time. Make your life count for Jesus Christ. The final thing I'd say to you tonight, if you're going to live an examined life, then you need to establish the right priorities for life. Now, there's two thoughts here. Here's what he says. For that ye ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live and do this or that. The first thing you're going to do if you're going to establish right priorities is you're going to resign yourself to the will of God. That means that there ought to be a recognition that God is in control of our lives. And we're going to be submitted to whatever it is that He desires for us. Somebody asked me the other day in front of my daughter what she was going to do with her life. And she listed off 4 or 5 things. And then she looked over at me and she said, I guess I really can't do any of those things, can I? I said, no, you really can't. And then she said, here's what I'm really going to do with my life. She said, I'm going to do what the Lord wants me to do. See, it's not that those 4 or 5 things were wrong. But we've raised her not to do what she wants to do with her life. It's not her choice. She doesn't belong to her. She belongs to God. And for this, we ought to be saying, if the Lord will, we'll do this or that. We're going to be resigned to the will of God. We tend to think that the universe revolves around us. We ask God to bless us. We ask God to give to us. We ask God to help us. In fact, we pray like this. Come on, God. Give me an A in this class. After all, I deserve it and you can do this for me. Instead, we should find our place in God's plans by praying, God, what have you got going on today? You love this world. You love this world into life. You created this world. We're all yours. What part do you want me to play in this drama that is unfolding before me today? God, do you want me to be a success? I'll be a success for you. God, do you want me to be a failure? I'll be a failure for you. Whatever it is that you want, God, that's what I want with my life. That's what it means for this, you ought to say, if the Lord will. Charles Colson reminds us, never confuse the will of the majority with the will of God. It's not what the multitudes think you ought to do. It's what He thinks that you ought to do with your life. Resign yourself to the will of God. And then be receptive to the ways of God. I cannot think of a more fitting verse to leave you with as you leave a school like this than this verse. Therefore, to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. Boy, parents, don't you like that verse to be able to say to your children as they go out the door? You see, young people, you have been given an incredible education. I dare say that just listening to what has been said about you tonight, that you've come from great families and you've been attached to great people that have poured a lot into you. But be reminded that now you're accountable. Therefore, to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. C.S. Lewis said, the greatest thing is to be found at one's post as a child of God, living each day as though it were our last, but planning as though our world might last 100 years. See, those are not conflicting thoughts. It just means this. I am going to allow God to make the most out of my life. And I'm going to invest my life in living for Him and doing what He wants me to do. And when you do that at the end of your life, though multitudes of people may not define that as success, there is a place where you will stand at the judgment seat of Christ, and you will hear the highest commendation that you can ever hear. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. And you will know then that you have done with your life what really matters. What is your life? What are you going to do with your life? Or better yet, how are you going to let God take control of your life? Let's bow our heads for prayer.